Hi all, and you're very welcome back. So we're pushing ahead in this series of lessons all about validations. And in this lesson we're going to be discussing how to validate for presence. So this check or this validation is something that we are all very familiar with. Whenever we fill in a web form or an email address or something online, you're pretty much guaranteed that there is some form of check for validation so that a field is not submitted empty or incorrectly, i.e. that the presence is there, that something is entered into the field. So we're going to learn how to add validation for presence to our sign-up forms. We'll begin by extending the user test file that we worked on in the last lesson, and the one that I still have open here in front of me. And we're going to extend this file with a test for the presence of a name attribute. What we need to do is to set the @user_instance variable's name attribute to a blank string or a string of spaces. We then check using the assert_not method that the resulting user object is not valid. So let's go ahead and jump into it now. So beneath this test here should be valid. Let me enter in a couple of spaces. There we go. Test should be present. So again, we are testing presence. Or I should say here, name should be present. There we go. Do. Okay, so our instance variable @user.name equals. Now, so here we're entering in some spaces. So it's not a blank name that can be entered. Assert_not our user instance variable dot valid. And that's it. Let me save that and let me run the tests again, and these should be red. So down here in terminal, if it jumps into it for me, there we go. Rails test models. Let's see what we get. Hopefully we should have a red line. There we go, one failure. That's because we don't yet have this validation in place. Now, in a very early lesson, we seen that the way to validate for the presence of the name attribute was to use the validates method within the argument. So that went something like this. I'm just going to add in a couple of lines here, and I'm just going to type in this, presence true. Now don't type that in because it won't work and it's just going to break, but I'm just adding it in here for demonstration purposes. But this is what we used in a very early lesson. The presence true argument is a one element options hash. Remember, we have already learned that curly braces are optional when passing hashes. Let's now jump into app models user file. So let me remove this line here as we don't need it. There we go. Let me save that. So let's jump into app models user. So app models user. There we go. Okay, so like we say, we want to validate for presence. So validates, one too many there. So validates name. So validate the name, presence true. There we go. And one typo I've just made here is the colon should be after presence not true. There we go. You can see the text color change. Now let's open up the Rails console to explore the effects of adding a validation to our user model. So let me save that. Let me pop open my terminal. So here I am back in my terminal. Let's start up the sandbox. Rails console sandbox. There we go. Now let's create a new user. User equals user with a capital U dot new. So we're creating a new user object. Name. Now this time just two quotation marks and a comma. So we're leaving the name blank. We're leaving the name attribute blank. Email Tony @example.com. Let's hit enter. And we have our new user object returned with its attributes. Now, how do we check if this user is valid? And hopefully it should be invalid because it has not passed our presence validation here. We've left the name blank. So we say user.valid question mark for the Boolean option, False. Absolutely perfect, that's what we want. It returns false when the object fails one or more validations, and true when all validations pass. Now this is a small example and it's easy to see which validations fail. But imagine we had dozens, such as a massive online form. We can check what failed using the errors object, which is generated upon all failures. So let's say user.error .full underscore messages. Why is there an error? Because it's errors, not error in my line of code here. Hit enter. There we go. Name can't be blank. So that's excellent. So Rails automatically generates the error message for us. And in later lessons, we'll see how to customize these. So now that we know that the user isn't valid, what happens if we try to save it? User.save. False. It won't save. Perfect. Let's now run our tests. Hopefully these are green. Yes, perfect. The next thing that we can do now is write a test for the presence of an email attribute. So back into our user.test.rb file, here we are. And just below the last test that we entered, let's put in another one. Test, double quotation marks, email should be present. You kind of get the gist of this now. Again, our instance variable user.email. So these are the attributes of our user object. Equals. Same thing again. There we go. Assert not at user.valid. Question mark. Save that. Now we go back to our user file here within model. And what we do is we add in another validation. Validates email presence true. Perfect. Okay, and once again, let's run our tests. And this time we've gone to 3 tests because we've just added in a new one to check the presence of email address, but it's all correct and green. Excellent. Okay guys, that's it for this lesson. We've covered quite a bit, but I think you can really start to see it all coming together and how our tests play such an important role in our development. So thanks for listening, and I'll see you in the next lesson where we're going to look at how to validate for length.